This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.
Struggling with gut issues? Did you know that your circadian rhythms and the type of light you're exposed to massively influences your gut health and microbiome? The gut heals and repairs itself at night in the absence of blue light and in the presence of melatonin. Another essential reason why you should be blocking and minimizing blue light after sunset. Artificial blue light activates the sympathetic nervous system and keeps us stuck in fight and flight. We cannot heal and regenerate in a sympathetically dominant state. Artificial blue light has been known for contributing to gut dysbiosis. On the other hand, UV, red and near-infrared wavelengths of light have been shown to positively influence health and diversity of the gut microbiome. I will highlight in detail in the description what all the different wavelengths of light are doing to your gut. A healthy gut and microbiome is essential for brain and mental health, energy levels, metabolism, digestion and absorption of foods, skin health, robust immune system response, regulating inflammation, nervous system regulation, weight management, and so much more. This is why I make sure to get my belly and entire body out in the sun every single day, as well as use my favorite red and UV therapy panels from EMRtech.com. Check out the panels that I use on a daily basis to improve my overall health and well-being, and use the promo code MobilityFitness at checkout for a massive 20% discount. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Wisdom Podcast. Today we're going to have a returning guest, Dr. Sara Pugh. This is part 2 of our conversation. So if you haven't listened to part 1 already, make sure you listen to that one as well, because we gave a lot of valuable information. We covered her personal journey of how she got into circadian rhythms and quantum biology. We also talked about the detrimental effects of and the harms of blue light on the entire body pretty much. Also how artificial blue light depletes our dopamine levels, the fascinating nature of melanin, and also how different frequencies of light influence our biology, as well as the importance of being consistent and applying things into our daily life, right? So this is going to be like a mind-blowing conversation that we're going to have today. It's going to be a continuation on the circadian and quantum biology path. So welcome back, Dr. Sara.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas, for having me again.
Awesome. So we're going to dive into hormones today and mitochondria and how light influences all of this. So if you could explain to us in very simple terms, how does light influence our mitochondria and also our hormones, and how this is all interrelated to each other?
Okay, so with the mitochondria, because they're deep inside the body, they have to know what's going on outside, a bit like our brain is in a cave. So we have senses which feed information to our brains, and then our brains make a meaning out of it. So just for people who are not familiar with that, with things like phonons or sound or photons, they all arrive at our eyes, and then this signal can get propagated through the body. That's one way, using things like non-visual photoreceptors or proteins that can emit light. And then there's a whole complicated way in which light would get propagated through the body, but also in terms of how we actually see. The light comes in and our brains rearrange what we would call vision, and we attach meaning to it. So there's a lot of filtering that happens in terms of what really the world is. So for the mitochondria that are deep inside, they're in a way need to know what time of day it is, because they want to know whether they should be, they can make hormones. Should they be burning fat, or should they be doing autophagy, which is, or mitophagy as it would be called, which would be repairing or killing old and damaged mitochondria. So they have to know what season it is and what time of day it is, and this light needs to get from the outside into them, because fundamentally it's like a battery, the mitochondria, in one way, that if the battery in a device fails, so the whole device doesn't work anymore. And in terms of making energy, people have heard of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. That's one form of energy, but not the major form. They also make something called deuterium depleted water. So that will be water that's very hydrogen rich with not very much deuterium in it, because that's a heavy form of hydrogen, or heavy hydrogen, or an isotope. So that's got different properties, and it's, in simple language, like you asked for, it's just burdens us. And then the mitochondria are involved in other kinds of signaling in the body, such as talking to our nuclear genome or our genetics, and then communicating with the body's defenses. And the mitochondria I mentioned earlier make hormones and things, and they can make something called pregnenolone, which is like a master sex steroid hormone that other hormones can be made out of. And the other thing about mitochondria is that free radicals get produced because there are electrons flowing down the chain, but not all free radicals are bad. It depends on the context. So if there's the correct amount of free radicals in the body in general, it's part of our defenses. And in the mitochondria as well, there are times when the electrons would escape, and it can be part of signaling or autophagy. But also, if there's a problem in the mitochondria for lots of reasons, bad circadian rhythm, too much non-native EMF, the wrong food being eaten, the mitochondria we can imagine swell a bit, and then these electrons can start to escape. And this is what we would call sort of inflammation or negative or oxidative stress. So most people are aware that we want to limit bad inflammation at the wrong time, and oxidative stress just means sort of oxidation and damage of cells. So we can see how having the mitochondria functioning properly is vital for health. And studies now show that about 85% of chronic disease is linked to dysfunctional mitochondria. And then in terms of what people can do that's very simple would be to get the right amount of light at the right time of day for themselves and their brains and their eyes and their skin, but also to feed that information into the mitochondria, because in some ways people can describe them as a little sun inside us because they can emit light as well. So it's the whole as above and so below idea, as within and so without. There's a big sun outside that powers life, and we've got these little suns or microprocessors or batteries or water factories, whatever we want to call the mitochondria, that give life from the inside. So that would be the link between why sunlight and mitochondria are important, but also why them being inside the body means that it's our responsibility to go outside and give them red light and correct timing, because I refer to them as being separate from us in some ways because they are a relic of a bacterium, and they do have their own genome or genes as well. But over a long period of time, they've become part of us. But like our gut microbiome, the bacterial cells in our body massively outnumber human cells. I think it's something like 10-1. So we're much more bacteria, which mitochondria are a relic of, than we are human beings. So they run the show hugely. So this would mean bad mitochondria and gut microbiome would also tie into low energy, bad moods, things like that. So there's a whole plethora of reasons why in a symbiotic relationship, we could pretend we're hosting them and they're a guest, and we would need to provide the guest with appropriate things that it needs. And then in return, the mitochondria produces things for us. And this also ties into other factors. Them being a bacterium means they're sensitive to other compounds and such, like, for example, antibiotics and heavy metals and things like metformin and certain other medication, whether it's an antibacterial or not. So they're their own little entity inside us, and without them, we'd be in trouble.
Yeah, well, thank you for breaking that down for us. I think it's essential for people to understand their role and their importance in our health and well-being, because as you mentioned, that most Neolithic diseases today are linked to mitochondrial dysfunction, right? Because the mitochondria are responsible for generating this life force energy, pretty much, right? So they're their own mini factory in every single like system and organ of the body, and that's what's helping us to function properly. And I think it's essential that we understand their role so that we understand, okay, what does the mitochondria need? What do we need to do to support it? Like you said, that we give something and they give us something back in exchange, right? They give us the energy to have our life force, but we need to create them a nice symbiotic and healthy environment, an internal environment, which we can also use from our outside environment to influence our internal environment as well. So the type of food that we're eating, the type of light that we're exposed to, the type of magnetic or electromagnetic frequencies we're exposed to, whether that's native or non-native. So all of these things are influencing us on a very deep level and is altering our terrain and therefore altering whether our mitochondria are going to be healthy or not. So my next question to you would be, what other things beyond the things that we mentioned cause mitochondrial dysfunction? So beyond, I think we already covered last time, the artificial blue light, it's basically hampers complex 4 in the mitochondria, so it prevents like the mitochondria to make deuterium depleted water. How else, do mitochondria get damaged or, they have dysfunction?
Well, they're very dependent on red light, and the sun produces red light 24/7, 365. So lack of going outside and getting adequate infrared and red light, that would be a problem. And then because when we ground, we can grounding can be called earthing or anti-static or counter space, however you want to look at it in physics. So it can be discharging positive charge, which is not helpful for the body. And then in sort of simple terms, we can gain electrons. And as I mentioned before, the mitochondria, like it sort of runs an electric current down the electron transport chain. So doing something like grounding would be a source of electrons. And then making sure that the water that we drink is clean. I mentioned before about chemicals and distilled and then remineralized and structured, because when you make these microgeometries in the water, we could talk a long time about this, but in simple terms, structured water and exclusion zone water and coherent water is a source of free electrons, and these electrons can also go into the mitochondria from, it's not food electrons go in, but the route that food electrons get into the mitochondria is different. So we provide them with enough electrons. Then outside, there's also the magnetic field of the earth, and it's slightly different to grounding, that you don't need to be barefoot or wearing a conductive material under your feet to access the magnetism. You just need to be near it. And magnetism is something massively complicated, but in simple terms for people, we evolved in a magnetic field of the earth, and it is declining, when it has been declining for a long time. This is measurable scientifically, but in terms of electrons and protons, the right magnetic field can make them move more quickly. And in the mitochondria, like I said, we've got the current of electrons, and if they don't move properly, they're more likely to escape and get lost, as I said, and create inflammation. And so magnetism, we can imagine in some ways can sort of contract as well, which can help the electron flow. But also we've got proton currents or proticity in the body. So if these can flow more efficiently, then the ATPase, the little motor, the protons go down and through that motor. And that's part of making ATP and making sure that that part of the production in the mitochondria is working properly. And because we're designed to live in a magnetic field, if we take that away, as Dr. Dean Bonnelly in his studies on mice, when he put them in a mu metal cage and isolated them from magnetism, they started to move slower and slower. And then they tried to eat more food because they were trying to get more electrons or energy from food instead of magnetism. So there are lots of with magnetism, it's something that people find very complicated to understand, and me included. But just to make it simple for people, it's very common sense that if we evolved in a magnetic field, it's got numerous important features in the body. And if we're always inside, away from it, or upstairs, or in airplanes, or at the top of a high-rise flat, we're separated from the magnetism as well, which would affect the mitochondria.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is that, like, normally, even in nature, if we were somewhere really high, we would be on top of a mountain or a hill, but we would still be connected to the earth. So that means that we wouldn't be separated from it. But now with, like, modern technology and our ability to build these high-rise buildings, like you said, like, we're able to fully disconnect ourselves, which is a totally unnatural phenomenon for us human beings. And I think I read before that the further away you are from the Earth's magnetic field, the easier you get, like, the manifestation of different diseases, because again, like all the things that you just mentioned, And it's really cool to know that you actually don't need to have your bare feet directly on the ground to get the benefits of magnetism. You just have to be in direct contact with the ground pretty much and not be on the top of a building.
Yeah, that's correct. And also, there are things. It's more magnetic closer to the poles. So places like the UK, Scandinavia, Greenland are very magnetic, and then you can get pockets of magnetism in volcanic areas as well.
That's cool.
And it's something. It's like a geological phenomena. But then there are also magnetic grid lines in the Earth, things like the Becker-Hagen's grid, and that's based on the Earth's magnetic field. And we have magnetic grid line crossovers where there's been many studies on the benefits of meditating or being on one of those. And our ancestors like to build churches and mosques and other temples and things like Stonehenge on these magnetic grid lines. And this is a slightly different, because magnetism, charge, or dielectrics and gravity are fundamentally the same physics or the same thing. It's just so they're all intertwined with one another, and in a way we just want the most charge that we can gather, and then we want to place areas of compression in the Earth's magnetic grid, and that has benefits as well. So there's a lot to magnetism, but like a lot of quantum biology, the theory can be hugely complicated, but doing it practically is very simple. And it's just further reasons for people to go outside, because I often get people saying, oh, there's no point going out because it's cloudy. But then when it's cloudy, the infrared light still gets through the clouds for the mitochondria, and the magnetism's still there. And then there are other good reasons to go outside that can be helpful for the mitochondria. Then the blue light can get through the clouds. That's from the sun. So that helps us keep timing in our body clocks. Because if the clocks in the body shift, everything gets confused, because we've got big clocks for organs, the master clock, and then cell clocks and gene clocks. And the mitochondria also really need to know what time it is as well. Because then they can modulate the metabolism based on what processes your body's actually trying to do at a given time of day. Because we have daytime activities in biochemistry and then nighttime ones. And then the other thing about mitochondria is they make melatonin as well for themselves. So if we bathe them in blue light, it stops them from doing it, and so they can't repair properly. And then if we provide them with infrared light, then it's a good recipe for them to be able to make their own melatonin. And because this is quite new research, it was Scott Zimmerman, he has a paper on it, that first told me about this. But I would imagine that they would share their melatonin with us as well. It's slightly different pathway to the pineal gland melatonin for sleeping, but it's still something really important. So we don't want to prevent the mitochondria having the ability to heal themselves. So sitting in blue light isn't just bad for cortisol and blood sugar and dopamine like we talked about. It's also bad for the mitochondria, because also the blue light can inhibit complex 4 from making water properly, because inside the mitochondria there are proteins in the electron transport chain, and we could describe them as a chromophore, because they're light sensitive, and there happens to be that the water making complex favors red light, and if blue light is predominating, it's going to interrupt the production of water. And that's why people just tend to feel really dehydrated, say in a shopping center or an airplane or an office or something like that. It's the light as well as the not being outside and the non-native EMFs, because it does affect the mitochondria's ability to do their job.
No, all of this is so fascinating, and I get really interested when it comes to the chromophores within the mitochondria. I find it super cool how every single protein complex, where like a chain, like a transport chain within the mitochondria, where the electrons are passing through so that you make the ATP, each complex or each protein is, stimulated by a different wavelength of light. And I find that super fascinating, how nature made it so perfect that, you have to be exposed to specific frequencies of light, which is basically sunlight, right? It comes like in the divine form, divine recipe that our body actually needs, that we don't need to actually try for for mitochondria to thrive. All we have to do is basically just get out there. And the cool thing about sunlight is that it's just a change in ratios throughout the day, right? So in the morning we've got predominantly blue and red, and then as the day is going on, then it's changing the ratio of the colors, and the spectrum of the frequency is changing like an orchestra. And then that is giving our body the information about how the mitochondria and the hormones and all of these processes should be coordinated, right? Because as you said, that we have these cellular clocks in every single system and organ of the body, and those organs and systems, they get thrown off if we don't have that orchestra of light hitting our skin in our eyes to be able to tell our body what time of day it is and what it should be doing, and whether mitochondria should be making more melatonin or not. And it's cool because when you are exposed to sunlight, you always notice that if you are quite a while in the sun and it's maybe not the hottest, but even in the winter time, and you find a nice not windy spot, you feel like you want to fall asleep. And I just feel like that's because your mitochondria are producing so much cellular melatonin, because it's like, you're just bathing in that red and infrared light. Would you agree?
I'm not sure, because also being in the sun's going to produce endorphins and enkephalins and
Uh-huh.
things like that. But that's sort of definitely a plausible idea. I just don't. I'm not sure whether they share their melatonin with us, because if you
Yeah.
measure melatonin in the blood, there's sometimes more in the morning than there is in the evening. So I think the melatonin programmed in the eye in the morning by ultraviolet light, it's got a different light signature, and for that reason it behaves differently in the body, whereas the
Mm.
melatonin that the mitochondria makes been tagged with a different light signal. So even though the molecules of melatonin look exactly the same, the actual information within the electron orbitals and things like that is going to be different. So it gives the potential to tag different biomolecules with light, so you can use the same molecule and different molecules can carry completely different information depending on what color light that the electrons in them were exposed to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is totally over my head. I mean, this is so much new knowledge for me right now. So I'm trying to process all of this information. So thank you for elaborating on that. And it does make sense as well. Yeah, that they have different roles because they come out at different time of the day, right? You have the pineal melatonin, which comes out in the absence of blue light or in the presence of darkness, right? And then you have the cellular melatonin, which comes in the presence of red and infrared, which is coming out at the different times of the day. So it makes total sense that what you're saying. You also mentioned previously how the mitochondria, that produce this reactive oxygen species, which can be potentially beneficial. And there is also this idea of, antioxidant, or taking antioxidant supplementation or consuming antioxidant rich foods to scavenge these free radicals or these reactive oxygen species, which is in excess. But at what point do we know that the reactive oxygen species is too much? Like, is there a way to identify that in terms of symptoms that we may be having? And what's your opinion on taking exogenous high dose, like vitamin C, for example, or methylene blue, or these kind of things for reactive oxygen species?
With vitamin C, we do need a small amount, but for many processes,
Yeah,
and it depends on the form, because ascorbic acid isn't vitamin C; it's a different
yeah,
molecule. And then when it
yeah,
comes to the size of these antioxidant molecules, everything in the body is covered in a hydration shell of water or exclusion zone water. So there's a barrier, and these molecules are too big to get through. But the body does use them, and then also we make a whole host of our own antioxidants like glutathione, melatonin's an antioxidant.
yeah,
And then I think the very famous study on smokers and antioxidants, didn't they give two groups of smokers antioxidants and some got none? And the smokers who received the antioxidants actually fared worse. And they may have even had cancer as well. So
yeah,
there's no, I think, and also when it comes to antioxidant activity, it's such a fine balance that the
Yeah.
body uses free radicals for timing in the body as well, because
Mm.
light has got it's electro and magnetic. So in a way, with magnetism, I don't want to go too deeply into it, but then a free radical is an electron that's unpaired, so it potentially may, because magnets don't emit anything. It's they don't emit magnetism or anything like that, but they perturb the field in which is around them, so they definitely do something. So in terms of free radicals, our bodies don't produce things unless there's a reason for it. So if somebody is producing an excess of free radicals, it makes more sense to stop whatever it is that they're doing that's inflaming themselves than trying to
Mm.
firefight it with taking antioxidants. And then I think vitamin E is a very famous antioxidant, but aren't there about there's tocopherols, and isn't there about 6 or 7 forms, and they have
Yeah.
shown that I think all of them except one you shouldn't supplement with, and there've been studies on it. And then some people think fish oils are antioxidants, whereas they're providing DHA and EPA. And
Yes.
when you've got a fish oil supplement, because they're so difficult to manage, because they're very heat and light
Delicate plants.
labile, they
Yeah.
can be very oxidative as well. And
Yeah.
then other things which are oxidative in the body would be iron overload. That's quite common, people having too much ferritin, and it's nothing to do with eating red meat. It's a lot more than that, and it ties in with copper being unbalanced and insulin resistance
Yes.
and things like that. And also the majority of bad iron or ionic iron or chemical iron comes from grains and processed food anyway. It's a different form in meat, and having that in your body could be very oxidative, so it makes sense to get rid of the excess of unbound iron than it does to try and mop it up with but also you have to be careful with like marketing language, that everything, people want to sell something, so they'll make a narrative and use simple language that the lay people would understand, and this idea of mopping up something bad like a free radical has just become the language, and therefore people just stuff themselves full of multivitamins and wonder
Yes.
why they don't feel good.
Yeah. So, for example, like what symptoms could somebody be experiencing? Let's say someone doesn't take any antioxidants at all exogenously or from the diet, but then they are having too much reactive oxygen species because of bad behaviors, like artificial blue light at night, non-native EMFs, bad diet, not sleeping, smoking, drinking, all this stuff, and maybe toxic relationships. And what kind of symptoms would they notice or manifest on their body?
With things like that, all the stuff you mentioned, you could run labs because you'd see it in the blood sugar, the
Right.
insulin, the triglycerides, the C-reactive protein,
Uh-huh.
and as I've got older, a lot of the times with diseases, I think that we all manifest different problems when we get depleted of electrons or inflamed or have bad redox or a bad circadian rhythm. And
Yeah.
depending on our genetics and also our worldview, we manifest different symptoms. So it could be massively varied. If somebody was inflamed, some people might develop diabetes. Some people would manifest inflammation as fibromyalgia. Some people it would be
Yeah.
depression, because that would be neuroinflammation. So it's one of these things that if people are experiencing symptoms, rather than just trying to be reductionist and find the cause, maybe look at the whole body globally and deal with having a bad circadian rhythm, having not enough water, having not enough charge or electrons, not
Mm.
having enough magnetism, bad mitochondria. And if you fix the terrain, the
Yes.
symptoms or the problems are very likely to go away, because you've given your body more power or
Yes.
charge, and that's basically that's what everything is in the universe, just plasma or the ether or whatever we are. It's just charge waves and rotating charge, and because the more we've got, the better we'll do. It comes back down to looking at what is it in my life that's stealing my charge.
Mm. Yeah, it always comes back to the fundamentals and the basics, and exactly what we mentioned already in this conversation and the previous one. It's the things that you do to actually be healthy are pretty simple, right? It's just get your bare feet on the ground every single day, at least once per day. Get out in the natural light multiple times during the day. You don't need to, roast yourself out there. You just need to use common sense, just like animals do. When you watch an animal, they're constantly grounded, if unless they're a bird flying, and they're just in contact with nature all the time. And this is what's allowing them to be healthy or healthier compared to us. Even though we have all these advances in technology, we are going more and more towards dis-ease, in our system, because we have just disconnected ourselves from our nature. So since you brought up the topic of omega-3s and iron, I have a question about lipofuscin. Do you know about lipofuscin?
Nope.
It's this what you call age, like skin aging. Like they say that basically lipofuscin is this stored iron and basically polyunsaturated fatty acids on your skin, which is caused skin aging. And I've just been listening recently on some podcasts why it's so important to take things like vitamin E to prevent, this lipofuscin, and also to not eat so much polyunsaturated fatty acids, including fish oils, even if it's from eating it from actual fish. So I know that fish is super important because it helps with the conductivity inside our system, right? And so now I'm finding that I'm receiving conflicting information about the polyunsaturated fatty acids, and then, whether fish oils are natural fish oils that come in a whole food form, if they're actually beneficial to eat or not, especially when exposed to sunlight.
Does that happen to be Ray Peat? Because I've heard for many years now about his views on polyunsaturated fat, but I think it's okay. We can look at this a different way. So
Yeah.
for lots of we can't eat out of season fruit and vegetables in the winter, and then say something like an island in the UK where very highly likely our ancestors would have been fishermen or women or cockle gatherers, and then we would have had meat. What are people supposed to do and eat instead is what my answer would be, because it's something
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you're referring to, because I've always eaten fish
Yeah.
all my life, just because
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with it, and I'm not understanding about this skin thing,
Yeah.
because that's why I don't go on social media anymore, because I just focus on reading books or studies, or I'll listen to lectures
Yeah.
about biochemistry and especially physics at the moment, because if I can understand the physics, then I can understand the biology.
Right.
And I'm not sure, because also if we didn't eat fish, where do we get DHA from? And also people that do eat seafood and meat, what would they eat instead? Because when we look at protein consumption and classify things as red and white meat, and pork being in between, it's like a balance of foods, and it would be something that our ancestors for certain would have eaten, whether
Yeah.
be it shellfish or whatever kind. And there's a whole tradition of fishing throughout the ages. So I'm not understanding what you mean.
No, I'm also confused. That's why I was asking you if you knew about,
But
the
also,
mechanism of action.
but I have heard of, but the thing is, first of all, with polyunsaturated fats, there's plenty of evidence that too much polyunsaturated fat in the skin means you're much more likely to be burnt from the sun. So
Yes.
therefore, you're turning something very helpful from the sun into something negative, not because it's the sun's fault, because
Yes.
it didn't invent canola oil or margarine. We did, and it's not natural. And then, as I mentioned before, if we're talking about iron dysregulation, I
Yeah.
can see there's multiple reasons of why people would have iron overload. And then because people have been told copper's dangerous, they have
Yeah.
copper and iron imbalances, and you need copper to regulate iron, and also you need copper to make melanin. So,
Mm,
and I know that iron is not very oxidative, and it can bleach the skin, and it can also make a funny coloured tan. So
mm,
I'm not sure, because I kind of, there's only so much I can deal with being told that this food's dangerous, because
yeah.
otherwise it makes me even more think I should be a breatharian. That's why I don't understand. Maybe if
Yeah.
obviously I eat raw animal based where I can, including raw fish. So I don't know whether
That's
it's a
amazing.
function of how the fish was cooked, or how
Yes.
the meat was cooked.
Yeah. Could
Because
be.
not that people have to ever do what I do. I just, as I get older, I have to find new things. And there was a great big post in my members group last night all about pressure cooking, and then somebody went and delved very deep into pressure cooking
Yeah.
and wrote a post about how it can damage structures because the heat and pressure's too intense. And then there's a lot of
Yeah.
people talking about barbecuing and frying because you make the AGEs, the glycation products. So it's
Yeah.
one of these things, it's too complicated because the people that have developed these things on their skin, how do you
Mhm.
know it's even those two things? It could be a completely
Yes.
different factor.
Yes. No, I totally agree with you. I just wondered your view on this because I know that you're so intelligent and knowledgeable about all these factors. So I wanted to hear your viewpoint. My personal viewpoint is that once you have these things in your system, like let's say the excess polyunsaturated fatty acids and dysregulated iron, basically, yeah, I think it comes down to pretty much excess oxidative stress, stress in general, like overstressing the system. Then I think that can manifest on the skin. For example, if you're doing like a lot of sun exposure and you're burning yourself, for example, or these kind of things, I think then it could probably manifest. But I think it's so nuanced, right? It's not as black and white as people make it sound like. Because I heard it on Matt Blackburn's podcast. I'm sure you know him, and also on Extreme Health Radio, and those are two podcasts I listen to quite frequently. And I just thought that this was a super interesting like topic. And because I know that fish oils, especially from whole foods, are so beneficial, I just found it so. I had this cognitive dissonance, and I felt like I needed to ask somebody like you who knows about these things if you have like a
But
different
also,
viewpoint.
I think have they accidentally factored in people that take a fish oil supplement? Because
I'm
also
not
it's like
sure.
everything's not, because if it's a fish oil supplement, they're completely different to the
Yes.
omega-3s in fish, because the fish comes with minerals and everything's protected inside protein. And then it
Yeah.
depends how you cook the fish, or if you don't cook it, and whether it's, because some fish are traditionally eaten raw anyway, like oysters and lots of shellfish, and a lot of people eat salmon raw
Yeah.
as well. So I think it's just too, I don't really, in terms of my brain and my head, like, of course, I don't know everything and I'm not like that intelligent. It's just at the moment, because of, we live in a biology and a biochemistry paradigm, and I've moved on from that now because I don't understand. So I need to look
Yeah.
at things through a physics lens, because it's much more difficult to fake physics. And I can't even pretend to be a mathematician or a physicist. I'd just rather at the moment completely change my lens and start to learn about the physics of the body and the electronics in the body. And also, I think you mentioned before about light. So we can just bring it back to that subject. Most people have heard of dial-up broadband and how slow it was. And then we all know what fiber optic or broadband is and how it's 1,000 times faster. So I'd rather learn about the light in the body, because obviously the amount of chemical reactions that happen in the body per second, it's impossible that it's a chemical reaction of just molecules randomly finding each other. And then light
Yeah.
has to also be involved. The same as the fiber optics analogy, it's not just going to be dial up in the body. So there's this idea of the light. And then I've been learning more about things like melanin and gold and semiconductors and superconductors in
Mhm.
the body, and how certain molecules like melanin and gold in the body can act as mirrors, a perfect mirror, so they can help bounce light around. And also about how DNA makes ultraviolet light, and how our emotions play a role in how genes are expressed. So
Mm.
in terms of supplements and food, I'm kind of not wishing to be disrespectful or rude to you. I'm just tired of it, because
Yeah.
it just seems no matter where you look, somebody
Yeah.
tells you mustn't eat anything. And
Yes.
if I was an alien and I landed on this planet and I wanted to learn about food and I went on social media, I
Yeah.
would compute and conclude it's probably better to be a breatharian and not eat anything, because no matter what, somebody will tell you it's bad for you, whether it's grains or meat or
Yeah.
coconut oil or
Yeah.
collagen supplements or fish or fruit or honey, or it's just endless. And then it goes into
Yeah.
histamines and oxalates, and it does make you think, think, okay, well, maybe we're not meant to eat anything. But then this also ties into what we've been talking about already, that it's very important to get energy from our environment, because yes, food is one way we can get energy and electrons, but also we can be a solar panel and get energy from the sun. We can draw energy, like I said, from the magnetism and from grounding. And then if we learn how to manipulate the water in our bodies properly, our gel water, and drink water that's energized, that's an additional source of energy. Then we've got things like the plasma that we live in. That's because it's a cloud of charge. It's going to have electrons in it that we can breathe in. So that's outside. And then because I mentioned breatharians, when I've actually got to know them, it's not just about them not eating. They're extremely genuinely spiritual people, and they really understand properly about making your own charge or gravity or bliss states, and being able to make their DNA be a superconductor. And it's not just people who are learning spirituality or pretending. They really do know how to harness some kind of internal energy, and they were the ones that taught me about how important it is to watch the sun rising. And they used to tell me it's called eating the sun. So there's still, no matter what, things that I don't know about the planet, and additional ways to gather energy. And then also the other really important thing, as I always say, is not to let energy be stolen from your body, because something like alcohol would steal electrons, and fluoride steals electrons. And then being in pain, in a physics language, that's a broken fractal. And then in neurology language, it's some nerve wiring that can't hold the charge. So that would be a way in which charge could escape through pain. And a lot of people completely, you have to look at so many lenses all at once. And this ties back to your speciality of movement, because every day, even though I was a movement teacher, every day I learn something new about collagen making electrons when we move our fascia. And then the idea of how physical pain could drain somebody's charge and cause weight gain for them, for example, not because they can't move properly. There's actually a physics reason as well. So no matter what, there's always and every day I learn something new or understand better something I used to know in the past. So that's why I kind of switched routes for the moment to go into more of a physics view of biology and biochemistry, because every single person you speak to, I know incredibly intelligent people, and they'll tell me all different things about supplements, or at the moment, a good friend of mine, he has a business making fullerene or C60, and then on another podcast people will say that C60 causes cancer. And then with methylene blue, there's one camp that says, oh, never eat it because it's an industrial chemical produced from waste. But so are B vitamins. A lot of supplements are made out of waste chemicals from industry. And then on the other camp, I'll hear people say how, and I agree with, they're all right, that's the thing, and I agree with people that methylene blue can donate electrons to the electron transport chain. It can help the electrons jump the queue. It does act as an SSRI. It can be beneficial for places like a flight where the amount of stress on our mitochondria is astronomical. And then, of course, it's been used for probably decades. I think maybe even like 80 years in medicine, and it's used in A&E for carbon monoxide poisoning. So it's a very standard and well-studied compound. So wherever I look, I'll hear a different story. So what it does come down to, people have got to some extent understand what they're taking, what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve, and how it works. And then they can work out for themselves whether they do. You mentioned vitamin C. I think whole food vitamin C supplements can be really helpful for people, but not ascorbic acid. Then an intravenous vitamin C, it behaves as a completely different compound when you use it intravenously, because it can produce like peroxide radicals. And I mentioned before that radicals are helpful for killing invaders, but also they can be very helpful for cancer therapy. So that the context of it is really important and enormous as well. So yeah, I'm sort of trying to link what we've been talking about together, so that people don't think we went off on all these tangents about what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's all interconnected. Thank you
Yes,
for
and
doing
it's
that.
all it's all context dependent, and I think labs and HTMAs are important. Even I don't think obsessively running them all the time and getting obsessed about it is, but there are millions of people galloping about that we don't know anything about any of their blood work. And of course, blood work isn't the be all and end all. It's a tool, not a rule, but it's a really interesting starting window, as a HTMA can be, for looking at hormone balances, emotional state, different levels of minerals leaving the body, heavy metals. And at least it gives people some kind of little window into themselves, and it allows them to then just decide, okay, well, actually, I think I didn't know about this problem, and I've been having these symptoms, because different things can cause different symptoms. So I think taking some kind of readings, even to my clients or group, I say you've got the free things like measuring your sleep, documenting pain, depression, anger every day, and keeping a journal. And then also you can actually measure different things, because there are certain very basic markers that are extremely useful, like triglycerides or HDL, insulin, or anything to do with blood sugar. Ferritin's a very useful marker. It's useful to know about your sex hormones. Thyroid's a bit of a funny one, because the poor gland is very exposed, so it seems to be battered from all directions, and that tends to be something I see. But also I think back to contextually for people wanting to improve their health. Some people don't know anything, and need to just start at the beginning, and that's fine, because I didn't know loads of things for ages, including about blue light, and they can just start doing what is going to move the needle for them, and then they can start to. And I know you also specialize in nutrition. That's something that either people didn't know they weren't meant to eat that, or they do know and they can't stop doing it. And then it would be taking some kind of basic investigative things in the body, such as labs and HTMAs, and then building upon that and helping people to choose different things to help move the needle. But then, like you, it's often what people are not doing is going to be the needle mover. And lots of people don't like exercise. Lots of people like having a lie-in in the morning. Lots of people like watching TV until 1 a.m. So you have to find the thing that you don't want to do the most, because usually that's the thing that's going to move the needle. And then it's because it's in relation, you work with clients as well, and sometimes when you go through all of their information they send you, and you as a client, as a practitioner, has a bird's eye view, and I always home in on the thing I want to pull out, and that's the biggest resistance I get from, no, you can't take this, make me do this, or take this away. And it's like, well, the thing we want to do the least is usually the thing that we need to do the most. I'm not sure your views on that, but I think everybody has. And then it's just about helping people to understand why removing or adding this thing is so important. So it does come back to education, and then explaining to people the benefits of seeing the sunrise for metabolic reasons, because we talked about mitochondria at the beginning, and they need to know what time the clocks start in the morning, so they can start turning something called the TCA cycle. We'll just call it a wheel in the mitochondria, and that's really important for metabolism. So if people never see morning light, they're never turning the key in their metabolism properly. And because, well, then people will say to me, oh, well, I know lots of people that never see the sunrise and they're really thin, but there's a whole host, we could do like 25 podcasts on why people are a different body weight. But I think fundamentally, in terms of our body clocks, everybody agrees that we want our clocks in the body to be on time, same as we want, if we go to an airport, we expect everything to run on time, otherwise it's chaos. So it just is simple terms. And like what you said with the animals and things, copying them, that they go outside when they're supposed to, unless they've been sort of trained to be inside, which is a whole other topic. So I think we're referring to wild animals and copying them.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's what you just mentioned basically is about bringing awareness to people, right? Like you and me, we are trying to bring the awareness, like what's important to do, also what's not important to do, because yes, you can be doing all the right things, but then again, like you said, we have to prevent the loss of charge, the loss of electrons from our body. And I think that's absolutely critical, because we can be trying to do a lot of effort to try and improve, but if we're not minimizing the things that are robbing our charge or our potential energy that our system needs for anything, healing, repair, regeneration, cognitive function, all that good stuff, hormones, then, we're not going to see like the major benefits that we actually want. But of course, it's better to do the things than not to do the things that we just mentioned, like, getting out in the natural light and blocking the blue light after sunset and getting the grounding, doing these simple things, because this will also motivate people to do the harder things. Because I find that with clients, it's actually easier if someone has a resistance towards exercise, for example. I find it easier if we try and fix a couple of their lifestyle habits first, like the sleeping patterns, waking up with the sunrise, maybe not taking so many stimulants, are blocking the blue light after sunset. Then all of a sudden they feel like they've got all this new energy again, this life force energy that they didn't know that they had. And now they're more eager and excited to get into a training regime. So that makes it so much easier to stay consistent with it. Because as with anything, I think anybody can have the motivation to start something, but it's more about, can you stick to it long term? That's where we are going to see the magic, right? The biggest results. But if someone is just going to start and stop in a week, anybody can do that. And that's basically what happens when people start the gym in January and then they quit by the beginning of February, because everyone starts with motivation. They just batter themselves even though they don't have much energy, and then they feel worse afterwards because they've depleted their body and they haven't taken care of their lifestyle factors which need to support their exercise. So exercise is not necessarily going to drain you, but it reveals to you what's wrong with your life. So, for example, if you do an exercise and you have pain, it's not necessarily the exercise. It's just telling you about your shitty behavior of sitting all day, or the way that you're breathing the entire day, or the fact that you're not sleeping. All of these things are contributing to your pain threshold and tolerance, and also telling you how good your workout is going to be. So I think it's so important that we, tackle health from a holistic approach. And like we mentioned in our part one of our conversation, that we shouldn't only focus on exercise or nutrition or just circadian rhythms. We have to stack everything together, because that is what is going to bring the best outcome for our health and well-being. And it doesn't mean that you have to be like Mr. Olympia or some kind of athlete to do all these things. Everybody needs to do these things. All these things that we're talking about, me and Dr. Sarah, is fundamental for any human being to even just be at a baseline, to be normal, to be healthy.
Yeah.
We want to be thriving. We don't want to be in disease.
Exactly, and in terms of movement, if you turn music on, humans move and dance. So it's not, and it's there's lots of if we get really technical and complicated into things like sacred gymnastics and certain kinds of movements, they can create an electric charge because you did a very important sort of spiral movement. So in terms of people not liking the gym, I totally get it, or why it'd be so embarrassing to go swimming or do a group exercise. I get it, and I suppose we can always end on something that I still completely view everybody as an individual, and everybody serves a purpose and is important, but so is all of biology. Like parasites serve a purpose, bacteria do, and everything's there for a reason. And a lot of like society, and we all get into a huge mood and think, oh, I'm pointless and useless and what's the point of this? But we're all an individual, and sometimes these so-called blueprints or recipes is just not suitable for that person, because they're never going to do deadlifts and stuff like that. Somebody needs to help them find a movement that suits them. And there's a plethora of movements about. And also the other thing, nobody's perfect and we all make mistakes. So it doesn't matter if people start off on and then they have a crash or a accident, or they miss the gym for 5 days. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's just, I think a lot of it's about making sure that if you do deviate, just to get back on track as soon as you can, and not to think you're a bad person. Because working with clients, people often think they're the only person that throws a cake away into the bin and then goes out at 3 a.m. and eats the cake out of the bin, or they're the only person that eats their granddaughter's chocolate. And there's like a million stories I could tell you about men and women of all ages of when they think they're the only person that does it and everybody else is perfect, when they're not, when we all do stuff wrong. And it's just about, I think, how well can you go do your best to get back on track again once you've made, a mistake, because that just happens. And then also to remember that you're an individual, and just because you really like a certain podcast or a person, you may not be able to do the things they suggest because you're not them and you don't live where they live. And there might be a different diet that would work for you better, or, cold thermogenesis is more important in northern countries than it would be at the equator. And it just,
Yeah.
you have to always remember that, you are important and you are an individual. And
Mm.
I think also, I always think no matter what, there's always stuff that we don't know and science doesn't know. And there's always some new idea around the corner. So it's all more about keep learning the science rather than don't just get sucked into empty podcasts. Like find out the theory for yourself. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you don't understand yet. Because I've found the more I've studied physics that, and as much as I didn't like it or maths at school, it's actually a form of mind expansion that I can do without having to get involved in any kind of chemicals. And it's something, yes, it's an effort, but, we always have to put time's a currency as well. So if we put time into something, we do get some kind of reward out at the end. So,
Yes.
yeah, I thought we might want to sort of end on that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, thank you for this awesome conversation, Dr. Sarah. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure that the audience is going to get so much goodness out of this and valuable information for them to apply into their daily lives. And again, like all the things that we said are fundamental, right? The things that they can apply immediately, and they are mostly free. So it doesn't take much effort
Yes.
to be able to start transforming people's life by just simply changing a couple of habits and behaviors, which are then inevitably going to help them with their mindset and their emotional status and their hormones, which is going to put them in the right trajectory towards the path that they want to achieve or they want to go to. So thank you so much. Where can people find you and connect with you?
I go by Busy Superhuman online. So I've got a YouTube channel. I've got a podcast, the Quantum Based Podcast. I've got Substack, Instagram. I used to be quite active on TikTok. I know it nearly got taken away. So I've got pretty much everything from long form videos to reading to short form. And then I have a members group and I have a variety of courses aimed for the general public and then interested practitioners. So I'm pretty easy to find, and I've got lots of free stuff, and then I've got other products if people are interested in those. But I always say to people, start with the free stuff, because that, like what you said yourself, there is a lot of free things about, and grab the low hanging fruit.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I will be linking to all of your details as well in the description show notes on YouTube and also on Spotify. And thank you so much, Dr. Sarah. I would love to do it again in the future.
Oh yeah, Andres, it's always fun talking to you. We know we could do it. We could talk all day, but then I think that people would heads would explode. But anyway, thank you very much for having me back.
If you enjoy all these awesome conversations that I'm having with the guests, I would really appreciate if you left me a 5-star review on Spotify, and you also followed me also on YouTube as well, because that helps to get the message out there and spread this awesome knowledge and wisdom. I hope that you have an awesome morning/evening wherever you are in the world, and until next time.
This is the Fitness Wisdom Podcast.